to simply throw the baby out with the bathwater is a bad idea. If you aren't in the game now, then you're missing the opportunities that most of the great investors have been waiting for years. I'm talking about the Warren Buffetts and the Sam Zells, and I could also bring up Rockefeller, though he was doing it back in the late 1800s. Hey, Jason Rogers here, and excuse me if my eyes are getting kind of funny here. I'm shooting this video with my iPhone to the side, like many of you have suggested I do here. There we go, I think I'm looking at you correctly. So let's get into this video. I want to talk to you in this one about how to stay calm and how to stay rational during this pandemic, and really how to take advantage economically. Now, firstly, again, I just want to have the disclaimer of please don't be shaking a million hands, kissing a million babies. Don't be passing this disease along, even if you're not that nervous about it in the same way I'm personally not that nervous about it, because maybe you're young like I am. Relatively speaking, that doesn't mean you want to engage in that kind of activity because it's going to pass it on to other people who aren't as fortunate, maybe because they're older or they're in poor health, etc. So be responsible and respectful in that regard. But now let's talk to you about how you can take advantage of the economic opportunities that are out there. But before we do, I want to talk about, again, what's between the ears, because this is the most important thing. And before I give you a couple of insights, I want to share with you what the last 3 years of my life had been. 2 years ago, and I'll really just stick to the last 24 months because it's relevant. 2 years ago, I was living down in a pretty chaotic country in Colombia. I was specifically in Medellin. That is indeed where Pablo Escobar came from. And it was a pretty common occurrence to deal with individuals who try to mug you or rob you. It was a pretty common occurrence to almost get ran over by completely unruly roads and taxi drivers, and just the nature of that country as far as how they drive is pretty insane. And being an individual, a gringo as they called me, which means a white boy, that didn't hardly speak Spanish when I showed up, meant there was just a lot of day-to-day chaos that took place. There was racketeering that takes place, and that's when basically these thugs will try to shake you down for money. They'll try to shake individuals down for money, or they'll try to shake down business owners for money. So I dealt with that firsthand. There were times when I absolutely heard gunshots in close proximity. There was actually at one point, I was in a nice building towards the end of my period in Colombia, actually near the top story, and I was living well, but right at the bottom of the building, I was actually with, I was in bed. I had somebody over, and the two of us were sleeping there. It was my lady friend at the time, and we heard, pop, pop, pop right at the bottom of the building. And, that was only about 10 o'clock at night, and so this is the world that I was coming from before I started buying, the real estate, and before I started endeavoring into M&A and buying businesses and whatnot. So that was the world I came from prior. And, I'll talk about the experiences I've had over the last 18 months, which have really hardened me as well. But I want to start by saying that tough times do make you tougher. Living down in Colombia really helped me expand my comfort zone and be able to think rationally when there was a bit more uncertainty in the world. There were times where I had, there was one story where I had 7 or 8 guards with these batons. It was probably 6 guards plus a kid, I think, who had a knife. So it was like a total of 7 people. And I was in a room, and they were trying to jack my iPhone off of me, and you get into enough of those types of experiences, and you learn how to think rationally. And by the way, they didn't mug me. I was able to, here, one sec, my arm's getting a little tired there. I was able to talk my way out of that situation and jump a fence and run away, right? And, I wasn't going to try to fight him 7-1 without any weaponry. But, I'm sharing these stories because I've dealt with a lot of chaos over the last 3 years, and candidly for me, it's almost a status quo as far as how I personally feel about it. It doesn't really affect my mood, my mindset, my emotions, but that's in part because of repeated exposure. This is something psychologists have talked about, they're well aware of, is if you're trying to get rid of somebody's fear, you repeatedly expose them to the very thing that they are afraid of. It's called repeated exposure, and it's a well-known psychological premise for essentially calming people's nerves. And this is really what this economic environment right now can do for you. It can help you increase your threshold for discomfort. And it's doing this for people across the nation and across the world, whether they like it or not, right? But for you, by really engaging in the reality of the situation on a day-to-day basis, you can expect that your fear will drop. It will come downwards. And the reason it will come downwards is because the amygdala, the fear-based part of your brain, it continues to sense, oh my God, there's this virus. Oh my God, there's all this panic. Oh my God, there's all this pandemonium. And day after day, as you don't die, your brain starts to realize, do you know what? This is not as bad as I thought it was. This is what happened to me down in Colombia, especially by the time I had been living down there after about a year. These day-to-day things that would freak most people out. Like when my family would come down, they were pretty darn nervous, a good few of them anyways, a few of them that did come down. By and large, they were pretty taken aback by a day-to-day experience in Colombia. But for me at that point, my amygdala had basically not turned off. I was still aware of potential risk, but the emotional part of my brain didn't spike, and thus I was able to stay rational. And this is really what you're trying to solve for. And I would say to you that repeated exposure, just being involved in this environment, it'll make you tougher for the rest of time. But I would say to you ultimately now, having talked about that the thing that has always worked for me in moments of chaos, and once I moved back from Colombia into the United States and endeavored to buy the first business that we bought out in Nebraska, the 7-figure cash flowing, manufactured housing community, now we're on the hunt for other businesses to buy right now. We actually have one under contract and another that's about to get under contract. And again, we're endeavoring in this right in the middle of this pandemic. But I feel remarkably calm in the whole scenario, and that's really because over the last 3 years, my life's been chaos. But a couple of things I do on top of just the repeated exposure, a couple of things I really like to rely on. One is fitness. Engaging the physical body in regular workouts is absolutely clutch. Whether that means just doing push-ups and sit-ups and some shadow boxing in your house or your apartment, wherever you live, whether you can sneak out and get a run in right now, which I think you're still able to do by and large, sprints, a run, jog, shadow boxing, push-ups, sit-ups. If you can get a pull-up bar, hit those pull-ups, these basic, front squats, even if they're just air squats, like working out the physical body will help you stay calm and rational, and it'll take you out of your head and put you into your body. And you really want to trust in your gut, your instincts, your intuition, I would call it. And this is by and large going to happen once you get out of your head and into your body. And workouts by definition help facilitate that. Another thing I would really recommend for everybody, and this is something I did when I was down in Colombia, this is something I do in business by and large, and it's something I'm even reverting back to more now than ever, now that things are a bit more unusual. It's daily routines and daily systems that keep you on track, on time, and on schedule. And what I mean by this, firstly, is the same wake-up time every single day. Say a 4 a.m. or a 5 a.m. wake-up time with the same morning ritual every day and the same core blocked activities that keep you moving forward. Especially for those of you who are actually in the entrepreneurial trenches, having consistency in your day amid chaos is probably the best way to take control of things, right? When the world is chaotic, what you want to try to do is turn your inner world into a place of certainty, right? The external world's chaotic, fine. Your internal world needs to be a lot more certain. And this is something that I really recommend for you. Create regular habitual patterns and systems in your life that give you that day-to-day certainty so that you're able to be at your best while everybody else is freaking out, right? And beyond that, I would say really mind who you spend time with. Who are you engaging with on a day-to-day basis, right? Individuals that are fear-based in a massive way will really keep you from being your best in these times. Individuals that are constantly telling you the number of deaths, the number of infected viruses, individuals who are constantly telling you how the world is going, to the end and, how the world is over and all this. Those kinds of folks really won't serve you right now. That's not to say that if these are family members, you should just completely disown them or disband them. I'm not a fan of that philosophy and that premise. I'm a huge believer of family first. However, there's a time to basically tuck your family into bed and say, okay, I've got to go do what I've got to go do now. And I think there's a lot of that needs to take place. And I think there's a lot of folks that would really benefit from that. Likewise, I would really try to be the master of my environment. And I recommend the same for you. What this means naturally is, look, you don't hear any news outlets on right now. Why? I don't even have a TV in my place. And that's by design. That is by design. Yes, I have the laptop or the computer here that I could access the news in. And sure, I'm not saying you don't want to be up to date with the day-to-day events that are taking place in this world. But what I am saying is this nonstop stream of media is not going to serve you. It doesn't serve you to see the same reruns, the Reddit breaking news, 8 more, infections in the last 4 hours. Like, of course, people are getting infected with this virus right now. But every other year in human history, people have gotten the flu, but you never got a breaking news. Cindy at 2211 Dingleberry Road just got the flu. It's really a bad flu this year, right? You never received those updates, and candidly, it was probably the best for you. Look, there's only a limited amount of things your brain can focus on. And if you only focus on the fear-based side of the world, you literally won't have any freed up space to be able to focus on the things that can make you money, that can help you be successful, that can help you and your family thrive during this economic period. Now look, will there be industries and sectors that are just massively hurt in this process, irrespective of how much you perform? Yes, there are. This is why I'm such a big believer in getting into recession-resistant sectors. This is why we personally only play in recession-resistant sectors. Right now, we're actually doing just fine. In fact, knock on wood, but we're doing really well during this process from an economic standpoint. And I anticipate that will continue, though I'm ready for anything. And so for you, this is why I always talk about the power of the investment thesis. There's a lot of you that say, just pick a sector and buy anything. And I disagree with that premise. I believe you want to invest in something that you believe in, that you would want to own for 10 years. It's the Warren Buffett. If I won't own it for 10 years, then I shouldn't invest in it for 10 minutes. That's exactly how I approach this. And that's how I recommend you approach this as well, because you want to really believe in the thing that you buy. And times like these really stress test the investments that you make. And I can say the investment we've made thus far, the big one, has done very, very well. And that's because we did a lot of due diligence to really ascertain whether or not this was a strong investment that would thrive in, or at least do pretty well in any economic market. But again, you can't make the right decisions if your brain isn't calm. You can play around with things like deep breathing or meditation as well. I am a personal big fan of those types of activities. It's whatever you need to do to get your head right, but you have to get your head right in this environment. And then lastly, I would say to you, it's really interesting how many people were so keen to buy businesses or real estate 2 months ago when everybody else was buying. And now suddenly how it seems like many of you are afraid to get into the waters now that there's actually huge buying opportunities. And it just goes to show how most people operate. They follow groupthink. They follow the herd mentality. And I hope that you don't do this as well, because this is the way to ensure mediocrity. If you do what everybody else does, you will get results that everybody else gets, which basically you can imagine to be middle-class results. Right now is the time to assemble your team and to go out there and buy assets. 2 years ago, it was tougher. 2 months ago, it was tougher. Now is the time. Yet many folks are doing the exact opposite. They're just following, oh my God, I'm gonna get more toilet paper. You don't need more toilet paper. You need to make more outbound calls to potential businesses and real estate owners that might be looking to liquidate. You need to be placing more off-market calls. You need to be essentially building your team and putting yourself in a position to be successful. That's my belief. And that's exactly what I'm doing right now. I'm practicing what I preach. Like I said, we have one business under contract and another that will most likely get under contract in a couple of days here. Now, will it be a little bit of an extended time before we're able to close these 2 deals based on the coronavirus? Yeah, it will. It'll slow things down a little bit, but it's not going to stop it. We're still going to move forward, and we're still going to proceed in the way we always were proceeding. Now, might we need to negotiate harder? That depends on how these businesses are performing during this period. We will take things on a day-to-day basis, just like you probably should, because this is a very unusual time we're in. But that all being said, to simply throw the baby out with the bathwater is a bad idea. If you aren't in the game now, then you're missing the opportunities that most of the great investors have been waiting for years. I'm talking about the Warren Buffetts and the Zells. And I could also bring up Rockefeller, though he was doing it back in the late 1800s. His first experience into the economic world, Rockefeller's, was the Great Panic of, I believe it was in the late 1860s or maybe the 1870s. But that's when he started to build his wealth, right? When everybody was freaking out, he learned that it was super important to keep a cool head and to stay mild in temper at all times. And that's what ultimately helped him build Standard Oil. And sure, he did a couple of things along the way that probably weren't ethically ideal, but there's a lot of great principles you can learn from these behemoths in the investing and business world. And by and large, all of them know that when everybody else is fearful, get greedy. And so for you, if you're going to be successful in buying businesses, if you're going to be successful in this game, which is a very difficult game, this is not for the masses, this is for the minority. But if you're one of those rare few, a great test I think you could put yourself to is, am I staying calm and rational during this period? And are my actions mirroring that, right? Because you can think all the rational thought in the world here, but if you can't get yourself to take action, then it doesn't mean anything. These great investors didn't just think rational thoughts. This isn't the law of attraction. They actually acted with rationale during moments of uncertainty, and by and large, that's how they made a lot of money. We're going to do that to the greatest of our abilities, as long as it's ethical and moral, and I would implore you to do the same. All right, if you've liked this video, thumbs it up, share in the comments below what do you want me to talk about next, and I'll talk to you in the next video. And by the way, if you haven't yet, subscribe to the YouTube channel.